Well, good morning. It is apparently 10 o'clock. My clock is a bit slow, so I'm going to get started. My name's Peter Holland. I'm coordinating the service this morning, and we welcome Allan Saugstad, who's going to be speaking to us about his experience of working in Glory House, which is a transitional community for people coming out of prison, basically, and he'll tell us more about that. We're also grateful this morning. It seems like we have, perhaps those of you who are new won't know this, but it looks like a good turnout this morning. We have a lot of people here. And so I want to welcome all the people here who I haven't seen before, or I've seen only once or twice. We seem to have a lot of visitors. So perhaps one of the things we might do after is just in a few minutes when the announcements are completed, we'll turn around and shake hands with our neighbours, and then we can sort of, you can figure out who are the people who've been here before, and those are the ones who might be able to help you with information should you need more about the church. And so the formal announcements, I haven't got any, nobody has given me any, but if there's a member of the board who has announcements, they could come forward now and give them. Well, on the other hand, as nobody's coming forward, the other thing to do is if anybody has an announcement, please feel free to stand up and give us your announcement. So I will wait a second for that too. Oh, Mike.
I can give one announcement. There's the Apollo up in Flandreau. Today's the last day, and I think 1 o'clock is the final entry.
Okay.
So I recommend that.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
I would like more information on the Tri-State Gathering. Sunday, August 11th, Tri-State Gathering at the historic Dayton House.
Oh, yes. Oh, someone will have to tell me about that. I know what it is, but I just wonder whether, are we going?
Well, it's for anyone who is interested.
Okay.
Oftentimes we try to get together and carpool. I don't think we've had the date long enough to get that organized. But they come in from Iowa, South Dakota, and Minnesota,
Yeah.
and we join together once a year for a tri-state service, which is quite nice. And then there's always a potluck afterwards, so it's a great place to connect with other UUs. So I think we can look at organizing some type of carpool for those who are interested. So we'll get something out in one of the Wednesday emails so people can kind of sign up. But it is a wonderful service, and we do often try to get.
And will we still be having service here on that date, or will that take place
We always
the
have the
service
service
here?
here because usually it's just a few people that go, so things will continue as usual here. And then those who want to go will go, and then it's usually several hours because it takes an hour to get there, a few hours there, and then another hour back.
Just to, yes, so to summarize, there's on August the 11th, there is a tri-state gathering of Unitarian Universalists in Worthington, Minnesota. And we're invited, and we usually send people, but we still have our service here as well. So that's what that's about. Any other announcements? The announcements obviously are in the in the order of service after the on the sheet, so you can look at that. We'll do the opening, the prelude, and then we'll greet each other. From the east comes the sun, bringing a new and unspoiled day. It has already circled the earth and looked upon distant lands and faraway peoples. It has passed over mountain ranges and the waters of the seven seas. It has shone upon laborers in the fields, into the windows of homes and shops and factories. It has beheld proud cities with gleaming towers, and also the hovels of the poor. It has been witness to both good and evil, the works of honest men and women, and the conspiracy of knaves. It has seen marching armies, bomb-blasted villages, and the destruction that wasteth at noonday. Now unsullied from its tireless journey, it comes to us, messenger of the morning, harbinger of a new day. And so we light the chalice in celebration of one more day and the circling of the earth.
Thank you, Peter. This is actually maybe not suitable for children.
Oh dear.
But as I thought about our topic and this whole idea of incarceration, and it was fresh on our minds in the last couple of weeks, especially with all the stories in the news about children in cages, which is another form of imprisonment, which we're doing as a nation on the southern border. And I was privileged to attend the vigil that was held at McKinnon Park a week ago Friday, when a handful of people from Sioux Falls came together in solidarity with the refugees. And one of the speakers was Tanisa Islam, who's an attorney here in town who gives legal services, shares her professional ability as an advocate for refugees, which incidentally, when we hear about unaccompanied minors, 400 of them are here in South Dakota, which was a big surprise to me. The fact that they're not just all clustered in the southern states, but some of these children who've been separated from their parents and other family members for whatever reason are here in South Dakota, and a lot of them are actually in Minnesota waiting for immigration court. And it's such a sad story. So not exactly a pleasant children's story like you probably would rather hear at a time like this, but this is just too important to not share. So Tanisa Islam shared some quotations of things that have been written by children on the border. And if I become weepy, I'll apologize ahead of time, but this, as a grandparent, touches my heart. A boy, age 8, wrote, they took us away from our grandmother, and now we are all alone. They have not given us to our mother. We have been here for a long time. I have to take care of my little sister. She is very sad because she misses our mother and grandmother very much. We sleep on a cement bench. There are 2 mats in the room, but the big kids sleep on the mats, so we have to sleep on the cement bench. Another boy named age 16 says, they told us we could only have 1 layer of clothing, and they threw away the rest of our clothes in the garbage. And then a girl, age 15, said, I started taking care of, there's no name, we'll say Maria, who is 5 years old, in the icebox after they separated her from her father. I did not know either of them before that. She was very upset. The workers did nothing to try to comfort Maria. I tried to comfort her, and she has been with me ever since. Maria sleeps on a mat with me on the concrete floor. We spend all day, every day in that room. There are no activities, only crying. And I'm sure you're aware that the icebox is what they call these detention facilities because they're kept so cold. And I heard on the news that in the previous 10 years, there were no deaths in the facilities for refugees under ICE. I guess it becomes a pun. I hadn't thought about that till now, but the ICE box is the facility because it's freezing cold and it's under the auspices of ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, I believe. Under ICE, that agency, there were no deaths in the previous 10 years. And now there have been 10 deaths in the last couple of years. And it apparently is a deliberate policy of the administration to make conditions miserable and to supposedly discourage people from coming by treating them this way. So this is not an accident of history, but it's actually a deliberate policy that is being carried out. One more quote. Girl, age 16. We slept on mats on the floor and they gave us aluminum blankets. They took our baby's diapers, baby formula, and all of our belongings. Our clothes were still wet and we were very cold, so we got sick. I've been in the US for 6 days and I have never been offered a shower or been able to brush my teeth. There is no soap and our clothes are dirty. They have never been washed. So I didn't really prepare a way out of the despair that is shared by these children. But maybe there is no simple, simplistic, warm, fuzzy, pleasant way to deal with this. Maybe we just need to sit with the sadness, and I'll try to say something more inspiring in the rest of the message that I share later. But for now, our hearts go out and our prayers go to these people. And in the spirit of love your enemies, our prayers are with the administration also.
I think we're going to sing children out. Our tradition is to sing the children out. Remain seated, and we'll sing number 413, which is up on the screen. So just give us an introduction.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the Spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
Full time, and people will respond with, is it one with an italicized, or is it?
This one is not italicized, so we'll just alternate. There are 4 paragraphs or 4 sentences, so 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, okay.
And this is by Ralph Waldo Emerson. The title is A Person Will Worship Something. A person will worship something, have no doubt about that.
We may think our tribute is paid in secret and dark in the recesses of our hearts, but they will out.
That which dominates our imaginations and our thoughts will determine our lives and character.
Therefore, it behooves us to be careful of what we worship, for what we are worshiping, we are not.
Perhaps you noticed that the title of that hymn was Chernobyl. That's a kind of modern allusion to events and tragedies that have happened, I suppose, to our world. And so Allan Saugstad is our speaker this morning. He comes to us from Glory House, and Allan was in seminary, a Lutheran ordained minister before you started working in the more secular field. And he's going to speak to us about the experiences of Glory House and his own commitment to it. Right? Thank you.
I'm remembering last Sunday, and so to provide a little continuity, those of you that weren't here last Sunday, the most memorable line for me was, "What the hell, it's all metaphor anyway." I've been a free thinker for a long time, and it reminds me of when my youngest daughter came home from college at Grinnell in Iowa and said, "Jesus is so overrated." So, thank you for laughing. I know that was such a downer when I shared the children's message, but I really do try to have a sense of humor too. And I feel like I need to just share a little bit of my credentials. I first attended a UU church in Northfield, Minnesota when I was in college. And then I went to Manchester College in Oxford, England, which is a Unitarian, just one U, Unitarian university there. Because the English Unitarians, as you probably know, are part of the anti-establishment portion, because the Church of England is the national church, so the nonconformists had to have their own, and so the Unitarians are among them, and so they have a spirit of free thinking as well. Locally, I moved to Sioux Falls 4 years ago, and Mark Sanderson and Susan Randall welcomed us to Pettigrew Heights with their homegrown tea and got me involved in the neighborhood association there. And appreciate Mike sharing about the prison ministry that Mark did and that you've continued and taken up the torch, and that's really wonderful. Very important ministry. And I also mentioned to Peter on the way in that I did take 5 quarters of clinical pastoral education a long time ago as part of my seminary training. That's CPE for short. And after the first quarter, I rewrote the words of a popular song to say, "What do you get when you take CPE? You get a lot of feedback on your issues. Some days you cry till you run out of tissues. I'll never take CPE again." So no offense, Peter. That was a quarter century ago in a different life, in a different state. My worshiping community here in Sioux Falls has usually been St. Mark's Lutheran Church, which is over south of the VA on Elmwood Avenue. Among our members are former U.S. Senator Tim Johnson, current State Senator Reno Neseba, Ann McGovern, daughter of the late Senator McGovern, and Kathy Brechtelsbauer, who's a longtime advocate for the underprivileged here in Sioux Falls. And so why I'm telling you that is that I feel like that's a relatively small church also, and we align well with the values and the community outreach that I see among you here in All Souls, and from my times worshiping with you and reading your newsletter for the last couple of years. So I really feel privileged to be among you, and I feel like I'm among kindred spirits. But the topic today is not a fun topic, so I want to just share one more moment of levity. My favorite story, often told by the late Senator John McCain, about 2 men in a prison dining hall, and the one says to the other, "I sure don't think much of this food." And the other one said, "Yeah, it was a lot better when I was the governor." So, in terms of this topic, if you saw in the electronic newsletter, how did we get to be the country that incarcerates a larger percentage of our population than any other? That's a question that's big enough for a master's thesis, and I really got carried away with this portion of the message, so I'll try to get through it quickly. But if you think about phrases like this, the Wild West, vigilantes who took the law into their own hands, rugged individualism, each man for himself, those are the kinds of things that have become American values and they're part of our blood. So when I was teaching English in Hong Kong, if I would have the students there write something about Americans and their picture of Americans, they would often say about us, their minds are full of freedom. Not every society has this mentality. The Japanese have a saying, protruding nails get pounded down, suggesting that anyone who doesn't conform will be pressured back into line. In a village in northern Norway, everybody keeps their sidewalks cleared of snow throughout the winter, and nobody has to enforce it. It's all done by peer pressure. It would be a disgrace not to clear your sidewalks. In Chinese culture and Latino culture, the family is the most important, not the individual. In Africa, it takes a whole village to raise a child. In Israel, they have the kibbutz, where everyone works together. And there's a Jewish saying that when something bad happens, think Sandy Hook again, one person may be guilty, but the entire community is responsible. It's a totally different mentality when you think about it that way, that somehow we're in this together and we share as a community, and so we share responsibility when bad things happen. It's not just on one person. Our American nonconformism has led us partway down this path in our obsession with freedom, but an even greater factor is our fear and our insecurity. We want to be safe, and we're trying so hard to be safe by guarding our borders and by going to war. Growing up in Alcester in the 1960s, a lot of cars were parked on Main Street with the doors unlocked and the keys in the ignition. And I saw one brave soul among you that left your windows open this morning. Not brave because of my brain, but brave because somebody might get in your car and look for something. But I'm impressed by that. Among the hundreds of things that spouses could argue about back in the 60s was whether or not it was necessary to lock the house. We've seen an erosion of values and an erosion of respect for property during yours and my lifetime. When my high school class visited Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha as part of a field trip, and we heard about the test flights and the training flights and the emergency drill fights by the Air Force fighters, and the huge amounts of fuel consumed by these aircraft. I was telling my church youth group about it the next Sunday, and I commented, this is how our country is locking our doors at night. Now it's 50 years later, and nothing has changed. We're still spending huge amounts of our national budget on defense. As a nation, more than any other country, all in the name of security. Another factor in American culture is the pursuit of pleasure. You can correct me if I'm wrong in the discussion afterwards, which I'm looking forward to. But when Jefferson, is it correct that he took the phrase, which was from a philosopher, and I'm sorry, I don't know who, life, liberty, and property. That was the original phrase, but Jefferson changed it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We Americans have pursued happiness to an extreme, from our excessive materialism to our self-centered me-first lifestyles, to the video games and superhero movies that entertain our children. We want what we want, and we want it now. Delayed gratification is no longer a virtue. Holding your tongue and counting to 10 is seldom suggested anymore. And angry text messages and emails fly back and forth across space at the speed of light. Is it any surprise that we have a drug crisis, since these chemicals promise instant relief from whatever unhappy feelings we are experiencing? It's commonly known that a huge portion of the prison population is there because of drug-related offenses, and that blacks and Native Americans here in South Dakota are disproportionately represented because they often face discrimination in the system and can't afford legal representation. Imprisonment became the successor to slavery for much of the black population. And the Native Americans are either consigned to reservations or prison, and it seems like those are the two main options for that population. So I've identified these 4 things: excessive freedom, worshiping security, pursuit of pleasure, and racism. These are the false gods that brought us to where we are, the country that incarcerates more than any other. Now I'd like to reread the quotation from Emerson as you think about those 4 false gods that have become so much a part of our fabric. And by the way, in the UU tradition, there's freedom of thought, yes, but freedom of thought is not the same as wanton pleasure and abuse of our political freedom. So Emerson said this: "A person will worship something, have no doubt about that. We may think our tribute is paid in secret in the dark recesses of our hearts, but it will out. That which dominates our imagination and our thoughts will determine our lives and character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship, for what we are worshiping, we are becoming." Excessive freedom, excessive emphasis on security because of our fear, pursuit of pleasure, and racial superiority. So the next topic, which is going to be shorter, the last 2 topics won't be quite that long, but rehabilitation. And I wish I would have used a different word for that part, because rehabilitation just doesn't have a very positive ring. There's so many people that think it's fruitless to try to do rehabilitation, and so the word isn't really used that much anymore. Instead, we talk about recovery. Recovery obviously is a major thing with addiction, and addiction is a major part of the lives of a lot of people in prison and people coming out of prison. So recovery from addiction, and also recovery from the past, from so many different problems. Think about the kinds of experiences that people who are in prison had when they were children. Adverse childhood experiences is what they're called now. And there is actually research that helps to verify the impact of these adverse childhood experiences, ACE, adverse childhood experiences. And so there are ways to quantify what kids have gone through or what they are going through and the likely impact on the rest of their lives, on their health, on their chances to finish school, on their chances of being in prison someday, on their life expectancy. All of that is impacted by these ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, such as abuse and neglect, the death of a parent, poor nutrition, incarceration of a parent, truancy from school, homelessness, mental illness in the family. All of these things are known to cause problems down the line. And so now it's been shown by research, and it's quantified, and it's being used right here in Sioux Falls in treatment programs. Evidence-based treatment is what they call it, so that you can give people the maximum chance of getting beyond this. But it's a lifelong recovery, just as recovery from addiction is a lifelong process. You're never recovered, you're recovering. And that's the case with so many people in the population that we deal with. It's a lifelong recovery process. Many of the people in jail and in prison also have co-occurring disorders. That is more than one major problem. So it could be addiction plus mental illness. And so these become extremely complex problems to deal with. At Glory House, where I work, we get some of the most difficult cases, because when people are released from prison, they're evaluated for risk of reoffending. So there's high risk and medium risk and low risk. The low risk ones are not probably going to be a problem. They may have a supportive family at home, they may have a good job to go to, and they may have learned their lesson, and so they have a lot of things going for them, and they're ready to stay on the straight and narrow and stay in the recovering mode. The medium risk and the high risk people are the ones that have burnt their bridges with their families and may not have healthy relationships out there, may not have a place to go, may be prevented from living in various places because of the nature of their offense. And so they are the ones that are more likely to come to a halfway house like Glory House. And so part of the solution for some of those problems, in addition to the services that we provide in terms of individual and group counseling, part of the solution is housing. And so you may have seen in the news that Glory House is in the process of building affordable apartments which are meant to be safe, sober housing for people who have finished their program with us or others in the community who qualify, who need a safe, sober place to live on a permanent basis because of not being able to live in other places. And so that's one of the exciting things that is light on the horizon, you might say, as far as helping to end some of the revolving door of recidivism. So we're excited about that, and I can tell you more about that in the discussion time. Finally, reentry. So when people are finished with their program in prison or at Glory House or whatever, I want to say first of all that I've been really heartened by the amount of compassion that I see in the community of Sioux Falls for this population. I lived outside the state, even though I was born here. I lived outside South Dakota for several decades before coming back 4 years ago. But there are a lot of churches, in addition to yours, who do jail ministry and prison ministry, and there are reentry mentors and coaches that are being trained for these returning citizens, which is a great way to put it. Reentry coaching for returning citizens instead of mentors for ex-cons, which is such a demeaning phrase. When you think about some of the practical things, we had someone there recently who had been in prison for 33 years. Think about how much has changed in society in general, and in Sioux Falls specifically, in the last 33 years. Can you imagine the anxiety of going out and facing all of this for the first time? Never having used a cash machine, or probably a computer, and probably never having seen a smartphone, and the list goes on and on. Sometimes people are released from jail at 2 in the morning, and sometimes even in the wintertime. Sometimes people who have, like I say, burnt their bridges and get out of prison, and they have nobody to pick them up, and they're standing out at the gate with the clothes on their back and $50 in their pocket, and will probably take half of that for a taxi ride to get anywhere. So this kind of reentry coaching, and in some programs, it's a team of people, not just one individual, to kind of share the burden. This reentry process is not for the faint of heart. Some of these people are very incorrigible. Some of them are very ungrateful. They have an entitlement mentality. It reminds me of Dorothy Day's phrase, how do you deal with the ungrateful poor? People who want to maybe take advantage of the generosity of others. Think about your worst nightmare of a rebellious teenager, and then see that in someone who's not a teenager anymore, but somehow still rebellious. There can be very difficult and discouraging times. And some people will try this and then they decide very quickly, well, that's not for me, I can't handle this. And that becomes one more broken relationship in these people's lives. So as I say, this is not for the faint of heart. But there are people that are very committed. I can't tell you how impressed I am with the compassion and the wisdom and the commitment of our counselors and case managers at Glory House. And the fact that you can have the appropriate level of tough love, which is a real balancing act, to have the right amount of toughness and the right amount of love. Another encouraging thing, so I'm going to try to wrap up with some positive notes here. On the local level, you've heard about the Triage Center, which is a place where it'll be determined when people are arrested, okay, where does this person need to go to have their needs met? Is it jail, or is it some kind of mental health facility, or is it a hospital? Where do they need to be? And so there's some really forward thinking in our community to help resolve these problems and not just lump everybody together in jail, which has kind of been the pattern in the past. On the national level, the Prison Reform Act that was passed last December is an effort to move people out of prison. And I just heard on the news that there are 3,000 federal prisoners being released this month because of that legislation. It reminds me of how mental illness was treated a generation ago when we realized that large institutions weren't the most appropriate intervention. And so, of course, medications became available to help with mental illness. And so many more people can be in society. And in the same way, the prison population, because of technology, the ankle bracelets now have alcohol detection in them so that they can do both. Smartphones are another, and there's drug testing required by a lot of employers, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of ways to monitor people other than keeping them locked up. And of course, another ironic thing is that the fiscal conservatives are happy about it because it won't cost us so much as a society to keep so many people locked up. So sometimes we do the right thing in spite of ourselves. The last thing I want to suggest, as I said, prison ministry is not for the faint of heart. But on the prevention end, I want to challenge you with this, that if you really are concerned about this topic and about the future of society and the world that we're passing on to our children and grandchildren, one of the best things you could do is to go and volunteer at a school and read to kids who need to be read to, or become a mentor. I'm sure you're familiar with the mentoring program through LSS here in Sioux Falls. They're short by several hundred mentors every year. There's waiting lists of kids who need a mentor. I personally am mentoring a young black student at, he was at Hawthorne and then he moved to Garfield, who doesn't have a father in the home. And I feel like that's one small way that I can help somebody not go to prison and not end up at Glory House someday. And so I invite you to consider that kind of opportunity. And I'll quote finally David Shapiro, who must be Jewish because it kind of harkens back to that statement, when something goes wrong or when something bad happens, one person may be guilty, but all are responsible. David Shapiro says this: there is no such thing as other people's children. We all have a responsibility.
Join me and remain standing and we'll say the words for extinguishing the chalice.
Chalice extinguished, but the light goes with us out into the world.